back to another episode of Debatable with your hosts, Nina and Kyle. I'm Nina.
I'm Kyle.
And for today's episode of Debatable, we explore the issues surrounding the re-recordings of Taylor Swift's albums. But we'd also use it as a jumping off point for more general discussions about how media corporations treat small artists and even big artists in general. So this is actually tangentially related as well to a motion that I debated before that went, this house believes that artists should have full ownership of their masters. This came with an info slide and we'll be explaining later on what masters are. But we are discussing this because there are actually a lot to take away from this situation in terms of understanding the industry as well as the struggles of artists in general. Because regardless of your position or stance towards artists, they are a big chunk of our culture and they are very important, especially given, we rely on them for entertainment this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean that just speaks to like how we treat art in general. Like we undervalue it when it comes to how much we pay artists that we know, like locally.
Yeah.
Even though we rely on art for literally every aspect of our lives. So I guess you can talk about Taylor Swift's issue from the very beginning, actually. The beginning of her career. And I feel like there's a lot of bad blood here. Well, reference. There's a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of history there. It seems like a lot. Because she's 31 years old right now, and she started 16 years ago, right?
Yeah, so we all have to go back to 2005, where Taylor Swift was a young artist who was just discovered by Big Machine Records, and then she signed a contract with them. She was 15 at the time, I think. Again, I'm not sure. Don't come at me, Taylor Swift stans. I'm doing my best. But Taylor Swift released several hit albums and singles and went on to become one of the most successful pop artists in the world. We all know this. She released 6 albums whose masters all belong to Big Machine Records ever since she signed with them.
Yeah, so I guess this is the time when we get to find out what masters even are.
Yeah, so the motion that I mentioned earlier came with an info slide actually, and the info slide says that a master is jargon used to refer to the underlying rights to a song. So literally, the master recording is the original recording or original version from which everything else stems. So a CD, a stream on Spotify, an appearance on a movie soundtrack, being released publicly at all those are licensed by the holder of the master's rights. This also means that the holder of the master has control over the financial gains of the recording as well. Usually, the record label owns the masters of their artists, but in exchange for signing over the master rights to their recordings, artists are often given an advance, as well as something called a royalty percentage from all profits made off of the music. So, this is what the arrangement was for Taylor Swift for a while, and her contract with the music label expired in 2018.
Yeah, so this is where I know a little bit. I actually know a little bit about this. Because after that contract expired in 2018, the issue blew up because Taylor Swift actually switched from Big Machine to Universal Republic Records. So she left Big Machine and brought a change in her contract to now also own her masters. But I'm not sure if she owned the masters that she produced with Big Machine.
No, she didn't. So that's where the problem came in. So Big Machine sold to private equity group Ithaca Holdings, an entity owned by powerhouse music manager Scooter Braun. So you've probably heard who this person is.
Yeah, Scooter Braun, yeah.
Scooter Braun, everyone...
We were making jokes about, yeah.
Yeah, people meme about this person, but they are a significant person in talking about Taylor Swift's history, as well as all the bad blood that existed between the past, in the past few years, I would say, or even the past few months, especially with the re-recording issue.
Yeah, and the difficult part here is that it's not really just Scooter Braun, but it's also the group that Scooter Braun represents. Because remember, we're talking about Ithaca Holdings. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the Holdings company is that it's not just, by itself. It's actually a company that was organized in order to hold and own and sort of control multiple other corporations, actually. So it's not just Scooter Brown. Scooter Brown is like the face of it, but as far as I know, like he is backed by just a lot of money and a lot of power.
Yeah. So what happened there was, because Big Machine sold to this holdings that was controlled by Scooter, let's just call him Scooter.
Scoot.
Scoot.
Our buddy
Scoot. Right? He then sold her masters to another company called Shamrock Holdings, another holdings, for a reported $300 million in 2019. So the problem here was Taylor Swift claimed that she was unaware of the sale to Braun's company and called the deal my worst case scenario, quote unquote my worst case scenario. So this was alluding to Braun's involvement in a number of feuds between her and the artists that he has managed. This is including Kanye West. Swift also said that she had tried to buy back her masters from Big Machine, but that the terms the label offered were intolerable. So it's kind of unfair in her opinion that she tried buying back the rights to her songs, but instead it was sold to someone else that she disagreed with, someone that she claims was a toxic manipulator, someone who would align themselves with the likes of Kanye West, which we all know she had great disagreements with ever since that interruption that is now a meme that everyone knows of.
Well, it's not just that, right? It wasn't just the interruption at the awarding ceremony. Where it was like Beyonce, but it was also like, there was like a phone call where Kanye was like, it would be so funny if I included you in my song. And then she was like, haha, yeah. But then she didn't know that
it would be like in a sexist way.
Yeah, in a very sexist, offensive manner. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so eventually Taylor Swift wrote a Tumblr post decrying both Borchetta, who was the owner before Big Machine, and Braun, the new Big Machine owner's record, whatever person. They called them toxic manipulators, and her accusations were twofold. Braun, she says, is a bully, and now he owns her master's holdings, and Borchetta is a traitor for selling them to Braun behind her back without giving Swift a fair opportunity to buy her old masters for herself. So on social media, the response was sort of mixed. A lot of people were like, stand with Taylor, we stand with Taylor, hashtag, all of those things. While others were saying that, especially artists, like I think Justin Bieber was on the side of Braun actually when they were being attacked. I'm not sure what their pronouns are. To be safe, I'm just gonna call them Scoot. Some people are saying Scoot was just a misunderstood man. But that's like an excuse for all men in general. So, personally, and I think you know what my stance is here, I kind of side with Taylor Swift a bit on this issue. As a Swiftie-ish myself.
I understand the argument, though, in favor of our pal Scoot. Mm-hmm. Because it's the idea of contracts. Like, you signed the rights to your masters to Scooter or Big Machine in this case. So, Big Machine has the right to do whatever it wants with those records. Like, you cannot force the owner to do, like, legally the owner
owns it and can decide.
So I suppose that is the argument there. Like, they were within their rights to do it. So I think that the issue here wasn't really about whether or not they could do it, but whether or not it was right that they had the power to even do it to begin with.
Yeah, but the whole social media discussion and the sides people were taking, that's a whole different issue. I think there's a lot of sexist elements in there as well.
Definitely, yeah.
But we're not going to tackle that. I think that's another Pandora's box or can of worms or whatever the statement is.
Metaphor.
Whatever the metaphor is these days. But basically, there's a lot of bad blood there that I don't want to touch. So
we keep using bad blood.
No, I mean...
We started with bad blood and we keep using it.
I mean, it's just another metaphor. It just so happens to be a Taylor Swift one. So, like, I'm gonna use it. Why not? So anyway, the sale, therefore, gave Braun, or our buddy Scoot, the rights to all master recordings of Swift's old music. Meaning, anyone who wanted to license one of the songs, or an album, or even parts of the song, had to get permission from him first. Instead of Taylor Swift, who was... admittedly, the person who wrote most of it, produced a lot of it, And most of the time, the record label is just there for distribution. But that's, another debatable issue. Like, what's the role of a distributing house or a record deal?
A recording studio.
Yeah, recording studio in general. I forgot words. But yeah, we're going to tackle that later. But that's that part of history that was rather messy. And I know a lot of you were there. You were there online when it all...
You were already alive.
You were already alive. Like, I hope you're already alive. I mean, duh.
This isn't NSYNC. This isn't Backstreet Boys.
Yeah, this
you
is
were
our...
alive for this.
This is our music history. This is music history coming to life in front of us. So you were there. You know what took place online. Unless you're not a Swiftie, which I guess is understandable because there's such a thing as being fatigued by all of the conversations on pop stars,
Yeah, but I think in this case, it's much more than just a conversation about pop stars or celebrities, because it really does talk about a very important issue about how we value ownership rights over intangible concepts like the right to a song, the right to lyrics or whatnot. So, as we now know, the solution that Taylor Swift used was to basically re-record all her past works. If she could not regain ownership of her masters, then by hell she gotta give up. Like, she's gonna re-record it and change it up so that she has an exclusive right to the re-recorded versions, and encourage, as we are encouraging you, if you are a Swiftie, to support those re-released versions if you can afford it, because there's also like a debate about how some fans can't afford it and they feel like they're being ostracized from their fandoms because they can't afford it. That's a completely different issue.
Yeah, but you don't need to buy it. Just stream it on the platforms that they're available in, like the YouTube channel, Taylor Swift, or the Spotify, the Apple Music, all that. Apple Music's paid though, right?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I was referring more to the other premium like merchandise that's related to that. But anyway, so that was that was the solution that Taylor Swift used. And during an interview, if I'm not mistaken, she revealed that after the sale was made to our pal Scoot, she wanted to ensure that he got as little money from her songs as possible. So the solution was quite elegant in my opinion, because wow, what a loophole. The solution now is to redirect all the fans to the re-released versions, the Taylor's version of all the songs. So that's the reason why, even if you really like the original versions, you might like the original versions more. But if you like it and you want to support the artist, then you should probably look at the one that benefits the artist the most. So that's going to be Fearless, Speak Now, Red, 1989, Reputation, excluding, I think, live versions, demo versions, voice memos. That's more than 100 songs, actually. So she already released Fearless, Taylor's version of Fearless, and just the internet had a big old cry day or a cry month because of that release.
I remember I was at work when they released it. I listened to some songs. I didn't have time to listen to all the songs. I'm sorry, Taylor Swift fans out there. I will dedicate some time to breezing through all the songs, but I listened to some, and I remember like people I was supposed to be at work with were also listening, and we couldn't get anything done because the internet was just blowing up. But I guess it's a natural consequence of like working from home, having access to the internet all day, and Taylor Swift in general. So we didn't have a productive day at work, and that's also I think Taylor Swift's fault. Yeah,
and also I just feel like in this atmosphere, what do you call that? In this economy,
this pandesal,
in this panorama, where people are understandably feeling very anxious or in a very vulnerable state. I mean, you can't fault anyone for overly resonating with, these things, especially because they do harken back to sort of a nostalgic time when, things used to be brighter, and you just feel things all over again. I mean, I'm not that big a fan. I respect it. But I used to be one of those toxic people. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Because of toxic masculinity. Thankfully, it's one of the things that I feel like I've outgrown.
Yeah, but where were you when the Taylor Swift songs were released? Like what period in your life were you in? I was in my puberty stage.
Originally?
I remember, like, having a lot of high school drama and then trying to find Taylor Swift songs that I could use to, like, explain my feelings. Like, I was that kind of kid.
I think in 5th grade, I think it was 5th grade when, I think it was Love Story that became, like, a very big deal.
Yeah, that was 5th grade.
I was in a very conservative Catholic school where gender roles are very rigidly enforced. And the teachers didn't outright encourage it. In fact, I feel like a lot of the faculty are part of the LGBT, but there was a sense that this is something that only the girls should like, and feminine men. And you should not, if you're a guy, you should not associate with those things.
Why is your story so sad? That's so sad.
No, but like it was always sort of a guilty pleasure, not just for me, but also for a lot of us.
I mean, it's a bop. It's a fucking bop.
Yeah,
Yeah. Don't be ashamed that you liked it.
They're trying to tell us how to feel,
Yeah. Yeah.
This love is difficult. But anyway, let's go back to the debatable issues here. Because as I already mentioned, the argument here is just coming from the legal sense of ownership. Like, if you own the masters, you should have the right to do whatever you want with it. And that includes not giving the rights back to the original writers of the songs. But that brings into the question, should artists just as a default have ownership of their masters to begin with? Because the argument here is that, like, it was Taylor's fault because she was the first one who signed the rights over to Big Machine in the first place, and now she just wants to, reverse time and make, like, not face the consequences of those actions. So the question in the motion is, should artists just as a default have ownership over their masters, and that cannot be removed through a provision of contract?
I mean, there are a lot of artists who have very similar thoughts on this, and it's a very clear yes, right? That artists should have ownership of their masters. Like Taylor Swift herself, in an Instagram post just a few months back, said that artists should have their own work for so many reasons, but the most screamingly obvious one is the fact that the art is theirs, and they're the ones who know that body of work the most. Prince famously told Rolling Stone back in 1996, I wasn't born yet, but this issue was already a big deal even back then. They said that if you don't own your masters, your master owns you. And I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, but then if it's so one-sided, what's the argument for opposition in this motion?
For this one, I had to consult my brother because he works... I mean, he doesn't work. Like,
music.
He's in the music industry for his band, and he handles an organization that's basically like a record label. So they have artists and they manage them. And he says the benefit of having, like, the masters owned by the record label is that there's uniformity in dealing with, like, contracts by all artists. That's one. It makes it much more efficient. Another thing would be that, like, it gives artists more time to focus on their actual art as opposed to the business side of it. Because the business side can be overwhelming. So not everyone can be Taylor Swift that just does it all. Like, she produces, she manages, she deals and negotiates on her own. A lot of people are not able to do so. So they argue, or at least this is one of the arguments. Honestly, my brother is on the side that masters should be owned by artists. But, just for formality, they also understand the side of record labels. And basically, it was because of that efficiency and the fact that more art would generally be churned out if someone else had to deal with the technical side of things.
Actually, I was also thinking that maybe you can make a pro-artist argument out of this in opposition by saying that, look, the ownership of the masters should not be like set in stone. It should still be up for negotiation, because in a lot of cases, if you are a new, like very small creator, right, or a very new artist, the ownership of your masters is a very strong bargaining chip, actually. So there might be some like sort of avant-garde type artist or musician where no one wants to take a chance on them, and giving up, like signing over the eventual rights to their masters actually would give them more of a bargaining chip or leverage in order to be given that chance to begin with. So the trade-off here is it might not be optimal for you in the long run, but in the short run, where like you find it very difficult to find anyone who is willing to take a chance on you and you really do believe in your art, then like it might be a valid way to get that start. So like it's basically a suboptimal future versus the worst case in the short term.
Yeah, but I feel like that argument preys on the vulnerability of these artists, right? Like, you're desperate enough to not consider. I mean, honestly, and this is not dissing on Taylor Swift, like, they were very young when they signed it, and obviously probably were desperate for that big shot, like the dreamy-eyed young wonder wanting to be famous and be on the big stage. So it's understandable why they would want to use that bargaining chip. But on the other hand, like, should she have been given that opportunity at such a young age?
Yeah, this actually brings us to another kind of debatable topic here, which is, should artists be able to sign contracts below the age of majority? So in this case, Taylor Swift was entered into that contract as a party. I doubt that she herself signed it. It was probably her legal guardian who signed it on her behalf. But in general, if you're not of the age of majority, you might not be like of the most competent mindset. And this isn't even just, exclusive to Taylor Swift only, because there are lots of other cases wherein you have minors that really want their start somewhere, kind of desperate for that money, that they enter into ridiculously disadvantageous deals. So a case that I learned a few years ago was about Brooke Shields. If you know her, she's she's an actress of a little bit of popularity. But anyway, years ago, decades ago, she was 10 years old when she got several modeling jobs from this dude named Gross. Which is like,
Foreshadowing.
Gross. Foreshadowing, right?
Should have seen it coming.
So one of the jobs that, one of the modeling gigs that she got as a 10-year-old, by the way, was to pose in the nude in a bathtub.
Oof.
Right? Big oof energy. And the problem with that is, like, the big portfolio of the series of photos was, named Sugar and Spice, which is just another layer of yikes.
Yikes.
Right? And the reason why she got into that mess was because, her mother, who was her legal guardian, signed on her behalf, 2 contracts. The first contract said that they gave the photographer, so Gross, the right and permission to copyright, and use and publish and republish whatever photos that they would take for any purpose whatsoever, right? And they also waived their right, and this is a second contract, they also waived their right to inspect or approve the finished photograph. And it wasn't even for a lot of money, like it was several hundreds of dollars. And actually the case came about because Brooke Shields was already an adult, and she saw that nude photo of her as a child on like a billboard or something. So she tried to get it down, and she tried to take back the ownership of those photos. And the court in that case said, well, I'm sorry, the contract, even though it was made on your behalf by your mother, is still binding upon you as an adult.
Damn.
Yeah, so that's really tragic, and it's something that's very common among small creators, especially creators that are not of the age of majority.
So I guess it applies to Taylor Swift as well. So that's the issue on like her age, and sadly it doesn't really factor, right?
Yeah. And the thing here is like just media companies in general, they tend to kind of be predatory in a lot of ways. There are, to be fair, a lot of exceptions, but there are, for sure, practices that are just so predatory, especially for smaller creators. So the biggest name here would, aside from Taylor Swift, obviously, is BuzzFeed. Because for years now, you've been getting like a steady stream of BuzzFeed creators who've been leaving BuzzFeed. Like, it was a trend before, like on YouTube, right?
Yeah, like why I left BuzzFeed.
Yeah, so, apparently, people in BuzzFeed have their content and their ideas and all of their videos that they worked so hard on, to be owned by BuzzFeed. So if someone says, oh, I have a great idea for an episode, I have a great idea for a series, they can't use that idea for their own series because it's BuzzFeed's intellectual property. So if you look at Worth It, right, the creators of Worth It made their own thing. They spun off of BuzzFeed and they review some of their videos. They try to recreate the things that they ate on Worth It, but they cannot continue the Worth It series on their new platform because that is BuzzFeed's property talaga.
Damn.
Yeah. And that's just like the nice examples, right? That's a nice example. But in reality, there were so many messier examples of people needing to start all over again because the best ideas were wasted on a company that did not really give them creative control. And this leads to another problem with BuzzFeed and by extension, a lot of other media corporations and outlets in general, is that if they hire you, if they, accept you, give you a chance, quote unquote, they will not allow you to work with channels or companies or other artists that they do not want you to work with. So ultimately, the creator and their creativity is subservient to the BuzzFeed brand, or in this case, like the brand of the recording studio, the brand of the label,
any brand that owns them. Yeah,
and that's the reason why we always have like hesitations whenever we want to get like sponsorships or anything, because like we do not want to be beholden to any brand.
We are our own brand. Thank you.
We try to be our own brand. But also like corporations, they know this. They know that a lot of creators are kind of like hesitant. They want to protect themselves. So the strategy here is a lot of them, not just recording studios, but like media corporations in general, maybe like media networks or whatever, they try to sneak provisions into contracts that are ultimately disadvantageous for the creator. So they will say, for example, oh, you own your content naman. We'll only take a certain cut. But there are going to be some sketchy provisions. Like, for example, we know some small content creators who are contacted by a media company. And for legal reasons, let's redact all the names. Because you know this, I know this. We need to redact these names. But they were promised so many good things. But what was strange was that there apparently was a confidentiality clause where if they signed the agreement, they could not complain to anybody about it. Like, they could not bring it to anyone, probably not even their lawyer or something, because it's absolutely confidential or something. I don't know. That's my interpretation as a law student, not a lawyer, not legal advice. I heard, by the way, that some people who are like, if I make it a drinking game where people have to drink every time I say that it's not legal advice. They just die or something. But anyway, it's not legal advice. But for these particular small-time creators, they found it very sketchy that there was a confidentiality clause at all. And for some reason, the firm reserved the right to sell not just parts of the episode, not just episodes, not just like
the content
mismo. There was a provision where the entire concept, the entire freaking show could be sold to a third person unilaterally without the consent of the creators. So I asked the creators like, what?
What?
How?
Why?
The bad part apparently was that when the creators first read it, it was just chill. It seemed very above board, nothing sketchy, but that was because it was buried in legal, friendly sounding legalese terms that sounded very neutral.
Yeah, and no one really reads contracts, right? People usually just agree to what was said during the meetings. And most of the times, the meetings are just a front. They're a lie. All of the content is actually in the paper that they submit after the meeting is done or before the meeting even happens.
Yeah, so sabi ko, look, I'm not a lawyer. That's
this
what I
is
said.
not legal advice.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but maybe you should try to negotiate for the changing of these terms. So, sabi niya, apparently, binigyan sila ng assurance na we would never do this to you. We would never do this
then
to you.
take it out of it.
And then I was just like, then take it out. And then the TikTok, the TikTok music comes in. Then do it. What are you waiting for? Take it out.
But they did it.
But they didn't. And like, they were saying na parang kakausapin daw sila ng legal team. And they're just like, we're just babies. We can't really talk to them. So it fell through. And now, unfortunately, their situation is being used as fodder for content by us.
Oops.
With their consent, naman. With their consent.
With their consent, yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite a big problem because there doesn't seem to be adequate, like, protection measures for smaller creators.
I mean, you could educate yourself, and that's one of the advocacies of my brother, right? I mean, the existence of their org is to combat a lot of the legal, like, barriers that prevent artists from actually succeeding, or the legal, not barriers, but the actual legal things that companies use to betray their artists in a way, quote-unquote, betrayal. I mean, some people would argue it's not betrayal, it's just business, but obviously that's up for debate, and that's why we're having this conversation. So again, with Taylor Swift, what then she had to do was re-record, right? Which leads us to the, like, last issue. It's a minor issue. How does she get away with it? Like, legally speaking, how can she re-record old songs and still get away with it? Without copyright issues being raised by our friend Scoot.
Well, again,
this is not legal advice.
I'm not competent enough to talk about these things with authority, but I have read that apparently Big Machine Records, when they entered into that contract, there was a clause called an original production clause, and that clause basically prohibited Taylor Swift from making her future songs sound exactly like the original versions. So the key word here was exactly. So yun lang, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So Taylor needed to make sure that her new recordings sounded distinguishable from her older recordings, but still retained the spirit of, you know, the art that she put out. And I think, like, it's actually different because, like, the message is different in the re-release. Just from, like, an art stud perspective, it might not sound so different, but the fact that, like, considering all the circumstances surrounding the re-release, it gives like a completely different message.
Yeah.
From
it's
an
its
art
own
stud,
work.
yeah.
It's its own work now. And like obviously there were parts that she did try to explicitly extinguish. I know you're saying like the implicit things, right? But explicitly there are a lot of changes as well. Like subtle lyric changes, like people were noticing changes with the instrumentals, people were noticing changes with the backup singers and the way that they were singing the backups. Like a lot of these small details, they do add up to the point that, Big Machine, they can complain, but legally speaking, Taylor's in the clear. So, like, kudos to her legal team and to her for managing to find all those loopholes. Like, that's the kind of sneaky behavior that I can respect here on Debatable.
Well, the copyright law that is relevant is actually really quite complicated, and we could talk about it, but I feel like Tom Scott on YouTube actually made a really nice, compelling video. Better than you and I could ever hope to make at this point in our lives, honestly.
And they have legal authority to say
They actually did consult with lawyers.
Yeah.
So they're not lawyers, but
there.
they got consultations.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you want to learn more about the different ways that copyright works, because it's not just like you could say that the lyrics might be copyrighted, and that might be true, but it depends on what was copyrighted to begin with. Because you can copyright like a song in its entirety. You can also copyright just the lyrics. You can copyright the sheet music. You can copyright like a particular performance of that song, right? So it really depends on the subject matter that we're talking about. What is the thing that is being copyrighted that you want to protect or that you want to, move away from?
Yeah.
So, like, just check out the Tom Scott one.
Yeah,
like,
we'll link it. Yeah.
Before we end our episode, we'd once again like to invite everyone to Debatable InterVarsity. It's our tournament that will be held on July 3 to 4 of 2021. So Phase 1 is currently ongoing and it's about to end soon. I believe it ends on May 13, 11:59 p.m. GMT +8. So, if you're interested in joining, then kindly register in the link that we'll leave in the description and look through our social media accounts to find out more about the tournament as well.
So that's it for this episode of Debatable. Apologies, it was a rather rambly one, but I personally have a lot of feelings about this. Kyle, I'm not sure if you have a lot of feelings about this. You're okay.
I'm okay.
Yeah, you have some feelings about this.
I have like 10% of your feelings.
Yeah, so I as a Swiftie, this is like a little proud moment. But I can't claim to be a really, really big fan. Like, I haven't gone to the extent of others. But, like, I am a fan. So I'm very happy that this is happening. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that people can learn about this situation.
Yeah.
So hopefully you learned some stuff, or at least were entertained, regardless what you're doing right now as you are listening. And that's it for this episode. We'll see you in the next one. Bye!
Bye-bye.